Evening everyone. There's one thing I read in the comments section of my videos more often than anything else. It's people commenting that they find my voice very calming. Something about it just chills them out and they could listen to me all day. And last week, when it became evident that things in the UK were going to shit a little bit, I started thinking about how I could do my bit to help people keep calm, let them know that there are other people out there. We're geographically separate, but we're all together. And I struck upon the idea of reading you all a story. I don't know, maybe it's daft, but the more I thought about it, the more I really loved the idea. And I kind of mulled it over for a bit and tried to work out what I would read, because it would have to be something that was copyright free, otherwise YouTube would take it down. And I had a look at a couple of Sherlock Holmes stories and stuff like that. And then I had an absolute brainwave. And I came up with 1001 Tales from Arabian Nights, which was one of my favourite books as a child. I quite like books. I absolutely love the story. All of the stories actually within that. And it turns out that I still have my copy from when I was a child. It's just on my bookshelf. And it's out of copyright. And so, my gift for you from this evening and every evening until this lockdown business is done with, maybe even longer if you want me to keep it up, I don't know, is to read you a chapter of the book. I hope you like it. I'm gonna assume a book reading position. The first chapter is called Scheherazade. In the chronicles of the ancient dynasty of the Sassanidae, who reigned for about 400 years from Persia to the borders of China beyond the great river Ganges itself, we read the praises of one of the kings of the race, who was said to be the best monarch of his time. His subjects loved him, and his neighbours feared him, and when he died, he left his kingdom in a more prosperous and powerful condition than any king had done before him. The two sons who survived him loved each other tenderly, and it was a real grief to the elder, Shahryar, that the laws of the empire forbade him to share his dominions with his brother Shahzaman. Indeed, after 10 years, during which this state of things had not ceased to trouble him, Shahryar cut off the country of the great Tartary from the Persian Empire and made his brother king. Now the Sultan Shahryar had a wife whom he loved more than all the world, and his greatest happiness was to surround her with splendour and give her the finest dresses and the most beautiful jewels. It was, therefore, with the deepest shame and sorrow that he accidentally discovered, after several years, that she had deceived him completely, and her whole conduct turned out to have been so bad he felt himself obliged to carry out the law of the land and order the Grand Vizier to put her to death. The blow was so heavy that his mind almost gave way, and he declared that he was quite sure all women were as wicked as the Sultana, if only you could find them out, and that the fewer the world contained, the better. So every evening he married a fresh wife and had her strangled the following morning before the Grand Vizier, whose duty it was to provide these unhappy brides for the Sultan. The poor man fulfilled his task with reluctance, but there was no escape, and every day saw a girl married and a wife dead. This behaviour caused the greatest horror in the town, where nothing was heard but cries and lamentations. In one house was a father weeping for the loss of his daughter, in another perhaps a mother trembling for the fate of her child, and instead of the blessings that had formerly been heaped on the Sultan's head, the air was now full of curses. The Grand Vizier was himself the father of 2 daughters, of whom the elder was called Scheherazade, and the younger Dinazade. Dinazade had no particular gifts to distinguish her from other girls, but her sister was clever and courageous in the highest degree. Her father had given her the best masters in philosophy, medicine, history, and the fine arts, and, besides all this, her beauty excelled that of any girl in the kingdom of Persia. One day, when the Grand Vizier was talking to his elder daughter, who was his delight and pride, Scheherazade said to him, "Father, I have a favour to ask of you. Will you grant it to me?" "I can refuse you nothing," replied he. "That is just and reasonable." "Then listen," said Scheherazade. "I am determined to stop this barbarous practice of the sultans, and to deliver the girls and their mothers from the truly awful fate that hangs over them." "It would be an excellent thing to do," returned the Grand Vizier, "but how do you propose to accomplish it?" "My father," answered Scheherazade, "it is you who have to provide the Sultan daily with a fresh wife, and I implore you, by all the affection you bear me, to allow the honour to fall upon me." "Have you lost your senses?" cried the Grand Vizier, starting back in horror. "What has put such an idea in your head? You ought to know by this time what it means to be the Sultan's bride." "Yes, my father, I know it well, and I am not afraid to think of it. If I fail, my death will be a glorious one, and if I succeed, I shall have done a great service to my country." "It is of no use," said the Grand Vizier. "I shall never consent. If the Sultan were to order me to plunge a dagger into your heart, I should have to obey. What a task for a father! Ah, if you do not fear death, fear at any rate the anguish you would cause me." "Once again, my father," said Scheherazade, "will you grant me what I ask?" "Are you still so obstinate?" claimed the Grand Vizier. "Why are you so resolved upon your own ruin?" But the maiden absolutely refused to heed her father's words. At length, in despair, the Grand Vizier was obliged to give way, and went sadly to the palace to tell the Sultan that the following evening he would bring him Scheherazade. The Sultan received this news with the greatest astonishment. "How have you made up your mind," he asked, "to sacrifice your own daughter to me?" "Sire," answered the Grand Vizier, "it is her own wish. Even the sad fate that awaits her could not hold her back." "Let there be no mistake, Vizier," said the Sultan. "Remember, you will have to take her life yourself. If you refuse, your head shall pay forfeit." "Sire," returned the Vizier, "whatever the cost, I will obey you. Though a father, I am also your subject." So the Sultan told the Grand Vizier he might bring his daughter as soon as he liked. The Vizier took this news back to Scheherazade, who received it as if it was the most pleasant thing in the world. She thanked her father warmly for yielding to her wishes, and seeing him still bowed down with grief, told him she hoped he would never repent having allowed her to marry the Sultan. Then she went to prepare herself for the marriage, and begged that her sister Dinazade should be sent for to speak with her. When they were alone, Scheherazade addressed her thus: "My dear sister, I want your help in a very important affair. My father is going to take me to the palace to celebrate my marriage with the Sultan. When His Highness receives me, I shall beg him, as a last favour, to let you sleep in our chamber, that I may have your company during the last night I am alive. If, as I hope, he grants me my wish, be sure that you wake me an hour before dawn and speak to me in these words: 'My sister, if you are not asleep, I beg you, before the sun rises, to tell me one of your charming stories.' Then I shall begin, and I hope by this means to deliver the people from the terror that reigns over them." Dinazade replied that she would do with pleasure what her sister wished. When the usual hour arrived, the Grand Vizier conducted Scheherazade to the palace and left her alone with the Sultan, who bade her raise her veil and was amazed by her beauty. But seeing her eyes full of tears, he asked what was the matter. "Sire," replied Scheherazade, "I have a sister who loves me as tenderly as I love her. Grant me the favour of allowing her to sleep this night in the same room, as it is the last we shall be together." Shahryar consented to Scheherazade's petition, and Dinazade was sent for. An hour before daybreak, Dinazade awoke and exclaimed, as she had promised, "My dear sister, if you are not asleep, tell me, I pray you, before the sun rises, one of your charming stories. It is the last time I shall have the pleasure of hearing you." Scheherazade did not answer her sister, but turned to the Sultan. "Will your Highness permit me to do as my sister asks?" "Willingly," he answered. So Scheherazade began. The Merchant and the Genie. Sire, there was once upon a time a merchant who possessed a great wealth, in land and merchandise as well as in ready money. He was obliged from time to time to take journeys to arrange his affairs. One day, having to go a long way from home, he mounted his horse, taking with him a small wallet in which he had put a few biscuits and dates, because he had to pass through a desert where no food was to be had. He arrived without any mishap and, having finished his business, set out on his return. On the 4th day of his journey, the heat of the sun being very great, he turned out of his road to rest under some trees. He found at the foot of a large walnut tree a fountain of clear and running water. He dismounted, fastened his horse to a branch of the tree, and sat down by the fountain, after having taken from his wallet some of his dates and biscuits. While eating the dates, he threw the stones right and left. When he had finished this frugal meal, he washed his face and hands in the fountain. While he was thus employed, he saw an enormous genie, white with rage, coming towards him, with a scimitar in his hand. "Arise," he cried in a terrible voice, "and let me kill you as you have killed my son." As he uttered these words, the genie gave a frightful yell. The merchant, quite as much terrified at the hideous face of the monster as at his words, answered him tremblingly, "Alas, good sir, what can I have done to you to deserve death?" "I shall kill you," repeated the genie, "as you have killed my son." "But," said the merchant, "how could I have killed your son? I do not know him. I have never even seen him." "When you arrived here, did you not sit down on the ground?" asked the genie. "Did you not take some dates from your wallet, and while eating them throw the stones about?" "Yes," said the merchant, "I certainly did so." "Then," said the genie, "you have killed my son. For while you were throwing the stones, my son passed by, and one of them struck him in the eye and killed him. So I shall kill you." "Oh, sir, forgive me," cried the merchant. "I will have no mercy on you," answered the genie. "But I killed your son quite unintentionally, so I implore you to spare my life." "No, I shall kill you as you killed my son." And so saying, the genie grabbed the merchant by the arm, threw him on the ground, and lifted his sabre up to cut off his head. The merchant, protesting his innocence, bewailed his wife and children and tried pitifully to avert his fate. The genie, his scimitar raised, waited until he had finished, but was not in the least touched. Scheherazade at this point, seeing that it was day, and knowing that the Sultan always rose very early to attend the council, stopped speaking. "Indeed, sister," said Dinazade, "this is a wonderful story." "The rest is still more wonderful," replied Scheherazade, "and you would say so if the Sultan would allow me to live another day, and would give me leave to tell it to you the next night." Shahryar, who had been listening to Scheherazade with pleasure, said to himself, "I will wait until tomorrow. I can always have her killed when I've heard the end of her story." All this time the Grand Vizier was in a terrible state of anxiety, but he was much delighted when he saw the Sultan enter the council chamber without giving him the terrible command he was expecting. The next morning, before day broke, Dinazade said to her sister, "Dear sister, if you are awake, I pray you to go on with your story." The Sultan did not wait for Scheherazade to ask his leave. "Finish the story of the merchant and the genie," said he. "I am curious to hear the end." So Scheherazade went on with the story. This happened every morning. The Sultana told a story, and the Sultan let her live to finish it. When the merchant saw that the genie was determined to cut off his head, he said, "One word more, I entreat you. Grant me a little delay, just a short time, to go home to bid my wife and children farewell, and to make my will. When I have done this, I will come back here, and you shall kill me." "But," said the genie, "if I grant you the delay you ask, I am afraid you will not come back." "I give you my word of honor," answered the merchant, "that I will come back without fail." "How long do you require?" asked the genie. "I ask you for a year's grace," replied the merchant. "I promise you that tomorrow, 12 months, I shall be waiting under these trees to give myself up to you." On this, the genie left him near the fountain and disappeared. The merchant, having recovered from his fright, mounted his horse and went on his road. When he arrived home, his wife and children received him with the greatest joy. But instead of embracing them, he began to weep so bitterly that they soon guessed something terrible was the matter. "Tell us, I pray you," said his wife, "what has happened?" "Alas," answered her husband, "I have only a year to live." Then he told them what had passed between him and the genie, and how he had given his word to return at the end of a year to be killed. When they heard this sad news, they were in despair and wept much. The next day the merchant began to settle his affairs, and first of all to pay his debts. He gave presents to his friends and large alms to the poor. He set his slaves at liberty and provided for his wife and children. The year soon passed away and he was obliged to depart. When he tried to say goodbye, he was quite overcome with grief and with difficulty tore himself away. At length he reached the place where he had first seen the genie, on the very day he had appointed. He dismounted and sat down at the edge of the fountain, where he awaited the genie in terrible suspense. While he was thus waiting, an old man leading a hind came towards him. They greeted one another, and then the old man said to him, "May I ask, brother, what has brought you to this desert place where there are so many evil genii around? To see these beautiful trees, one would imagine it was uninhabited, but it is a dangerous place in which to stop long." The merchant told the old man why he was there. He listened in astonishment. "This is a most marvellous affair. I should like to be a witness of your interview with the genie." So saying, he sat down by the merchant. While they were talking, another old man came up, followed by 2 black dogs. He greeted them and asked what they were doing in this place. The old man, who was leading the hind, told him the adventure of the merchant and the genie. The second old man had no longer heard the story. Then he too decided to stay there to see what would happen. He sat down by the others and was talking when a third old man arrived. He asked why the merchant who was with them looked so sad. They told him the story, and he also resolved to see what would pass between the genie and the merchant, so he waited with the rest. They soon saw in the distance a thick smoke-like cloud of dust. This smoke came nearer and nearer, and then, all at once, it vanished, and they saw the genie who, without speaking to them, approached the merchant, sword in hand, and taking him by the arm, said, "Get up and let me kill you as you killed my son." The merchant and the 3 old men began to weep and groan. Then the old man, leading the hind, threw himself at the monster's feet and said, "O Prince of the Genii, I beg of you to stay your fury and listen to me. I am going to tell you my story, and that of the hind I have with me, and if you find it to be more marvellous than that of the merchant whom you are about to kill, I hope you will do away with a third part of his punishment." The genie considered some time, and then he said, "Very well, I agree to this." See you tomorrow night.